Thanks, Katie. So my name's Andy. Welcome, everybody. It's really good to have you here. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. We've got three brilliant panelists with us. Vijay and Diana and Lauren are going to be sharing a little bit of their experiences, and we're going to have a kind of conversation together. But as Katie said, we'd love your input as well. I think one of the things that we want to do with this session is at the end of it to have some things that we can all work with together that can make next year's Fringe something that's mentally well for us, that builds our well-being, that looks after us more. A bit about me really quickly. I run a well-being company called Space to Breathe in Sheffield. I've attended the festival for many years, but in 2019, I was really honored to be able to provide mental health first aid to some of the directors and performers and artists at the festival. And my interest here is beginning to kind of build that, and those kind of principles of how we care for each other and care for ourselves. The interesting thing about a festival is that it's a short period of time. And so that ability for you to look after yourself within that kind of process, and with the growing number of shows around mental health and well-being, I feel like there are important issues about how we look after ourselves, and then what that means for how we look after ourselves as individuals and human beings throughout the rest of the year as well. So we're going to chat, we're going to have some discussion, and then hopefully at the end of it, we'll hold that together some ideas, and we're going to do a little mindful exercise just at the end, just before 2:30 to finish. But let me introduce our three panelists, and I've asked each of them just to share a little bit about who they are, what they do, and why this is an important conversation for them. So Vijay, could we begin with you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Vijay Patel. My pronouns are he, they. Just to give you a short visual description of me, I'm a brown person wearing a colourful kind of patterned greeny, orangey t-shirt with a black baseball cap on backwards. I'm sat in a theatre in a kind of like darkly lit room with a wall behind me and some windows, so there's some light coming down from the windows, creating a kind of halo, I guess. I'm an artist, a writer, and a neurodivergent access consultant, all of which I do freelance. And I'm currently working on a show with my younger brother called Brotherly, Otherly, Disorderly, which is commissioned by Unlimited, and that's what I'm currently working on as an R&D commission.
Thanks, Vijay. It's really good to have you here. Diana, could we hear from you next?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Diana Varco. I have long brown hair, and I'm quite pale with green eyes. I'm sitting in a pink chair. This is actually my writing chair where I wrote my show. Now 4 years ago, I took it to Fringe in 2019. And I have some just whimsical elements behind me, a lamp, a bird, and a window to my right, just for a visual of me. So I am a solo artist, and I use comedy and character work to talk about mental health and trauma recovery. As I said before, I took my show Shattered to Edinburgh Fringe in 2019. And I am really interested in just having a presence at the festival and supporting well-being and discussions on mental health. So really happy to be here.
It's really good to have you here. And what Diana hasn't mentioned is that she's in the States and it's about 6 in the morning. So thank you additionally for that. And then Lauren, could we hear a little bit about who you are?
Of course. So my name's Lauren. I'm she, her. I'm a white woman in her mid-30s. I have sort of brown hair with blonde highlights tied up at the moment. And I'm sat in my living room in Brighton, which is sunny today. And I have sort of a gold, quite extravagant floor lamp behind me, shaped like leaves. And I'm sat on my nice chair for thinking and writing as well, and it's quite swivelly, so I tend to swivel when I speak. As Katie and Andy said, I'm from staff and I'm the senior producer there. Something to Aim For is an arts and health charity based in London, and we're supported by the Welcome. And one of the projects that we do is the Sick of the Fringe, which is a year-round international project consisting of our own festival, commissioned writing, research and ally building. And a key driver for us is that we want to carve out space for artists and creatives in our communities to come together and connect across August, when we would normally be at Fringe Festival together, and throughout the year. And for us, it's great to have an event like this that focuses on care, mental health and well-being. In the final week of Fringe, like that's a really sort of a good time to sort of be checking in on that sort of thing and thinking about what's happened and reflect on that and think ahead to the future. And so it is important to us, and it is something that we would normally carve out space for via our Sick of the Fringe programme. But we sort of trialled this event with Fringe Society last year and sort of talked through sort of strategies for care and well-being in a Fringe context and perhaps as creatives with experiences of presenting in a Fringe context and the challenges those present. And we thought that even though we're still in sort of a hybrid world, which is obviously a result of the P word, and that there is a hybrid Fringe festival at the moment, we still think it's important to come together now and think about what those strategies for care and well-being are, that we can take forward into further sort of planning conversations about the Fringe next year, but also more broadly in our practices, either as an artist, as a producer, as a production manager, anything. So yes, thank you all for coming here and sort of being a part of this precious time that we've carved out to sort of think about those strategies for care. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Lauren. So that's our panel, and what we're going to do is frame a few questions and have a discussion around this subject of how to be mentally well. Now, one of the things that you wouldn't see about me, in terms of describing me, I'm a white man, bald white man with a beard, and you can probably tell that I've lived for a few years. What you can't see about all four of us is that, in different ways we have lived experience of this subject. And I'm guessing probably everybody in this room has had different experiences of challenges with their mental health and also of times of flourishing as well. So I just wanted to say right at the start, we want this to be a safe space, that if you want to turn your video off or turn your sound off and just take some time out at any point, please do that. There will be some subjects that we'll be discussing within the range of kind of mental health that may trigger different things for you. If you want to message me as the chair of the conversation directly, if you want any help with that, please do. Or if you want to take a break, then please do. Lauren and I will mention at the end are the two websites for Space to Breathe and Something to Aim For, which will have some stuff that you can follow up on. But I'm sure Diana and Vijay as well pick up different things that will hopefully help you. But most of all, do be safe and feel comfortable and safe in this space as we all share from our experiences. And I wonder whether I could start there. So we're talking about building a mentally well Fringe. I wonder for each of you, what are your experiences in terms of your mental health and well-being and performing, planning shows, directing shows, or being a performer, being an artist? What are the challenges? What are the things that work well? What are your experiences? Let's start there. I wonder if any of the three of you want to kick us off.
I can
go for it. Yeah.
I can say definitely. I think that as an artist, being on the stage and performing is refreshing and rejuvenating. I think sometimes, though, when we step into a heightened atmosphere of Fringe, or for me, I'm a solo artist and I'm stepping into a very personal story. So I think that I really advocate for self-care, whether you're in the writing process or whether you're in the performing process. And that looks different for everybody. When I went to Fringe, I was very mindful of the fact that I needed quiet space to recuperate and to, as I say, put myself back together again after laying my heart on the stage. Fringe environments are such that that space is not always there, or it might be cost prohibitive, especially at Edinburgh Fringe, I found my quiet space in the meadows. And so after my performance, I would go and sit and have a tea and just really reduce my sensory intake. So I think that even when we're pressed for self-care moments, I think we have the capacity even to find it in ourselves.
And you mentioned that you're performing a show that deals with the subjects of mental health. You know, like, are there any particular things that you've had to do in planning that or preparing yourself for sharing about that subject in front of an audience and with reviews and all the other things that can happen?
Definitely. I don't think so my show does go into some interpersonal violence, and it goes into intimate partner violence. So it can be highly triggering for the audience, as well as I didn't realize when I was writing it for me as the artist. Before I took my show to Edinburgh Fringe, I made sure that I had a lot of shows under my belt so that I was able to separate necessarily my artist and producer self from my person that was the pieces of me that were still healing, which I think with mental health, often pieces are still always healing. It's not, in my experience, it's not a finite solution. In my process of starting to do Shattered, I didn't realize it, but when I first premiered it, I needed to put content warnings in. I needed to give my audience pamphlets that would have resources if they were survivors of sexual assault or they were survivors of domestic violence, and that there are so many organizations doing profound and amazing work on the ground. And when I got to Edinburgh, that's really what the people I sought out. Not necessarily the people on the street flyering, which I still did because we need to fill our seats, but I went directly to organizations because at the end of the day, when we do this art, or when I do it, definitely, my mission and my message is what brings me to the stage time and time again. It's what brought me here today. So I think we have to always remember that.
So there was a sense quite of a network of planning, of things that you put around yourself, things that you're being aware of, and I guess then learning as you went along as well.
Yeah, learning and pivoting, and sometimes I put safety nets in place that didn't end up being what I had anticipated them to do. So sometimes part of evolving is looking at what's not working and accepting it, and that can be really hard in a context where oftentimes with Fringe there's a lot of expectations placed, there's a lot of money placed, there's a lot of heart. So I think that even if it's the last day of Fringe and you find a collaborator that you end up working with, or I made friends all around the world. And so I have to also look at that as a piece of value taken away, and not just what my ticket sales were at the end. So I think it's all part of evolution of the artist.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What about you, Vijay? What have been your experiences, your learning in performing, and your own mental health, and then also in terms of the subject matter you're working with?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the Fringe, my experience has been very limited in terms of performing there. In fact, I haven't performed there before, and my only experiences have been going more as a spectator, without support, more as a, doing it kind of on my own without kind of an organization to support me. And then the second time was with the British Council Artist Development Scheme, which had a lot more support to it. But both times were very interesting, because the first time I had a really horrible time because I think one of the biggest challenges is, it's quite an obvious one to point out, but I think we don't recognize it enough, is the need for space, and there is no space. You're hopping from show to show, you're in kind of crowded restaurants, and like everything, there's just no space in the streets, just anywhere. And it's exhausting. And I think sometimes we don't recognize that. So I think that contributed to me having quite a horrible time the first time. and also what it means as a brown person to be walking around Edinburgh, the Fringe, and seeing, you know, lots and lots of white people kind of everywhere, and also the shows kind of not reflecting, you know, my race and ethnicity, and just, you know, and kind of those cultural backgrounds. And, you know, I thought, you know, would often question why I'm here in this sort of space when I would go to a lot of live art festivals, like Spill, and lots of where there'll be kind of more broadly kind of representative of the kind of work I make and the communities I want to engage and the work I want to see, basically. So yeah, it made me question why. And then I didn't go for a few years, and then I went with the British Council, and the second time with a bit more support, because the artist development scheme had a lot more kind of support with accommodation, which was sort of in quieter spaces, and were really really kind of like looked through your kind of access rider and what kind of stuff you needed before you went, so they could say, okay, there's some extra support we can put in place for you, you know, like a check-in person who can, you know, who you can call at any point if things are tough. And so that having that having that person and that kind of support, and knowing that you're going with that umbrella, was really helpful. But then it made me think about the artists that are going with no support from an organization, doing this on their own, from their own pocket, including their access budget from their own pocket. You know, an access budget is huge in order to sustain your well-being and care. And you know, you're pretty much making ends meet just by accommodation and food and travel, and getting your show on the ground, let alone any additional costs that come with therapy or whatever else you need in that month.
Yeah.
So there's the financial challenges of that, not enough access costs and not enough access support, I guess, which would hinder why I would ever take a show there, because I'm always thinking about, okay, what is my access budget going to look like? And, you know, I may not be able to afford, you know, going as a brown autistic person to the Fringe is expensive, more expensive sometimes maybe, because of the additional care requirements. So I think I'm talking from neurodivergent disabled experiences there of how expensive it would be and the additional costs that would be required to take a show there, and maybe the other reasons why I'm not at the Fringe and why I haven't performed at the Fringe up until this point. So yeah, it generally in my work, I tour work around the UK, so I tour to arts organisations nationally, not as far as Scotland, and I always think about what the access costs might be in order to keep me mentally well, and that's how I sustain myself as an artist, and it's the only way I can sustain myself as an artist, aside from fees and paying yourself and travel and all of that stuff. It's really fundamentally, it has to be about the care budget and the access budget, which is how I can get on stage and continue to do what I do.
I think it's so beautiful to share that, because my reflection would be, I guess, that most performers would see the Fringe as, oh, I've got to go and do it, you know, like, and I need to be there. And you thought instead, I need to put myself first, and actually I need to think, how do I make myself safe, and then consider it. And I guess that kind of dynamic of us as a human being and us as performers and how those two interact maybe can get lost sometimes, but it feels like through your experiences that you've begun to get a handle, I guess, on what, you know, like what you need. You've mentioned access and an access rider, and maybe not everybody will be aware of that. Would you just briefly mention what is an access rider and how does that shape your safety as a performer?
Yeah, I realized after
no, it's good.
I should have explained what I was talking about. So I use what is called an access rider, and an access rider for me is a document explaining more about my neurodiversity, disability, gives a bit more of an overview of that. It's in a text-based document, but I'm working on different formats of it so that people can engage with it in different ways. And in there, I identified barriers that I face, so the general kind of barriers in the workplace, in the theatre, in my practice generally. And the access requirements. So access requirements would be things that, more solution-based things that other people can put in place to help dismantle those barriers, if that makes sense. So kind of jumping the hurdles. And they could be very simple things such as I get overwhelmed with speaking a lot. So we may have WhatsApp chats and it'll be text-based so that I'm not so overwhelmed with talking all the time and speaking. And yeah, so I would, and that is led by me. So that's the access requirements are what I've kind of come up with and said, this is what I need to support me. And it just documents all of that. So yeah, and
That's wonderful.
Called it an access rider. Yeah, I was just going to add as well, I just thought of something else, that another reason why one of the challenges about me going to the Fringe ever would be the fact that I make autobiographical work, and which is very traumatic. So additionally, I need to be very sort of cautious whatever space I take my work into. So what you were saying, Andy, about, you know, putting myself first, everything has to come from that first, because the work and the product, I guess, has to come after, and I have to see where that fits and where that's going to go, because, you know, essentially that will then come back and affect me again in another way, however that's received and how that's kind of what someone else does with that, whether that's a review or whatever it is. So, you know, it's like care for myself first and then care around the work. It has to come side by side, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Lauren, I wonder if you could come in here. We're hearing about, you know, like when we're preparing a show, the kind of preparation that we need to do, the support networks that are needed as a performer, and then that sense of putting yourself first and creating kind of boundaries. From your work with something to aim for, what other challenges that people might experience in performing, directing, or running a show at the Fringe? And by the way, everybody else in the audience, feel free to use the chat. If you've got any experiences, anything that you want to chip in, what challenges you've faced or your experiences, then please do, and I'll share them. But Lauren, what are your thoughts?
So, well, my first experience at Fringe as somebody participating in it was as a independent producer, and but bluntly, I put my needs last. I didn't think at all about what I might need because I didn't know what to expect, but also I took care of everyone else and everything else as a freelance producer. So there was a show that was on in a main house, in a main venue, that was sold out for the month. It was my first year working with the Sick of the Fringe, which was like a festival, a sister festival happening next to sort of the wider Fringe context. And I had other projects going on elsewhere as well. So I was on call 24/7 to everybody, because I just thought, you know, this work is really important. It's a privilege for me to be here. I need to be on call. I need to be here all the time on tap. The Lauren tap was on the whole time. So I didn't embed any infrastructure or care plans, like Vijay was saying, for myself. So I didn't sleep well, I didn't eat enough food. And I always had an excuse for it, like I haven't got time to go home and make a nice, nourishing soup. I just don't. So I kind of smashed through my time there. It was about 5 to 6 weeks, because I decided it was a good idea to go just before and just afterwards, which I wouldn't advocate for now. And I sort of thought, oh, I'll deal with the fallout of that afterwards. So I was exhausted. I was really sad. I had a terrible cold. And it was my first experience of burnout, like actual burnout. So that wasn't sustainable, like putting everybody else's needs before my own. And it's really common for producers, I think, especially independent producers, to do that. But rather than sort of shudder at my experiences there, I've flipped that to inform sort of part of my sort of key producing principles, and also through my work at staff. So I proactively support sort of colleagues and freelancers and partners that I have, and also sort of other projects that I'm taking care of, So I embed care lines in budgets like Vijay was talking about. That's a really simple tool that we can all deploy to sort of proactively look after ourselves, but also others. And it is okay to do that. Like funders will proactively support that. Venue partners will support that as well. Also giving space in schedules around projects. So don't like smash through rehearsals and then travel to Edinburgh and then be in Edinburgh and then have all your debriefs and come home. Like put space around that. It's, again, that's not even a budget thing. That time is a resource. It's a precious resource, and we should respect that and respect other people's time. But just as I was speaking, I'm sort of mindful and aware that my initial approach to being a producer in Fringe is actually like really ableist. It's really bad. It sets a really unfair precedent that's not sustainable and not an accessible way of working at all. So I actually really do need to take some accountability for that and learn from it. Like, rather than be like, oh yeah, I'm a superhero, I got through the whole month like that, and you know, I smashed through it. It's actually not okay. It's not accessible at all. So it's a learning path that I'm on about sort of my level of work and my standards of work. And if I could sort of tap into that and change that, it will make hopefully things better for the community that I work in, nationally and internationally, hopefully. That answers your question, Andy.
And that kind of thing of space, I want to lead in a moment to thinking about self-care, but can you give an example of how it sounded like it was a learning experience to find a sense of space, but how did you begin to do that? Diana went to the Meadows. Did you have an experience that changed your thinking on that, or something you tried that began to help you?
I think it sort of money wasn't sort of a resource available to me because it was a bit too late in sort of the production process that, you know, oh dear, Lauren needs some time. But for me, it was a bedtime ritual of having a really, really good herbal tea by the kettle. And I think the act of putting that tea bag in, filling up the mug with hot water from that kettle, that wasn't for anybody else. The beneficiary of that very simple gesture was me, not an audience, not an artist, not a venue, me. And I think that sort of closed down procedure, I think that really helped. And putting the mobile phone in another room, because if, you know, as soon as you just once answer that text at 2 a.m, you set a standard now that you're going to be available at 2 a.m. So I think I think for me, it's like tiny gestures and I think the tiny gestures are the ones that can have the big impact. But there's some structural changes too that we can do for sure that, you know, Vijay and I have started talking about through planning, actual planning that we can do.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much. We got a couple of comments on the chat. Rachel, I think the idea of having got through it is really key and toxic. It creates the idea that you're not doing it, or you are falling, and taking care of yourself comes at the end. I know that we have a lot about that at the Fringe Society and how to change the mentally to protect ourselves better. How we translate this is to how we prepare artists and performers on the stage. I think that's fantastic. Getting through and that kind of feeling that we have to. And then Joe has written, I think there is a big issue in that until you do it, you don't know what it's like. We've had many people comment there is a big difference between going as a punter and having a show, and I wonder how we can help that transition. And I think, again, this kind of thing of experiences, and I wonder if anybody's got anything else they want to share. Those kind of experiences feel really important, but looking after yourself, we've heard a kind of idea about that. They're creating boundaries and structures that help you, planning, getting support mechanisms. Do keep chipping those in if you want. What about self-care? We've mentioned this, and this is like a simple image of that, that if we're running constantly half full or less than that, we're not stocking ourselves up, we're not looking after ourselves. If we're giving out of what is within us, then that's diminishing as the week goes on. When I came and did mental health first aid, Black Wednesday was mentioned, which was the middle Wednesday of the festival. And it was a day which was identified with quite a lot of mental health and wellbeing challenges. But one of the things that struck me is it was after a day off that many people had on a Monday. So 2 weeks of flying and just exhausting yourself, stopping, and then all of a sudden everything hitting you. So what are Diana, Vijay, Lauren, talk to me about self-care. How little things that can help with self-care.
Yeah, so sorry, I just jumped in there.
That's all right, go for it.
Self-care. So I'd say when I graduated university sort of 7-8 years ago, I started thinking a lot about self-care, because I think I was kind of struggling with putting my own kind of like autobiographical kind of traumatic experiences on stage without care. So I started thinking about, you know, what initial things would take care of me. And that wasn't necessarily linked to my autism either. That was just generally for my own mental health and mental well-being. And I think in recent times, I've started thinking of it as self-maintenance as opposed to self-care. And the amount, and I think what I mean by that is the amount of work that it takes from maintaining that, maintaining the care, because sometimes it can get lost. And I think for me personally, I think I could, you know, do care stuff for a while, but actually when I start to think of it as maintenance, there's a lot more labor involved, understanding the labor that comes from caring for yourself. So I've started thinking of it like that recently, sort of in the last year or so. Yeah, I suppose since the pandemic, actually, because it's been so this sort of maintenance of caring for yourself, I think, is just absolutely increased because of the pandemic. And and now I've lost my train of thought.
I like that. So self-maintenance, is there an example of anything that you've done within the kind of self-maintenance, looking after yourself?
Well, I think it's the repetitiveness of the care things. And I suppose that's where I'm coming to it from the pandemic, I suppose, because the care stuff has been quite regimented, and, you know, you go for a walk at like a certain time of day and you go for the same walk. I think because things have felt so similar, the care strategies have felt so similar that it feels like maintenance, and it feels like you do these things as part of your day, ritualistic stuff that you do. Yeah, so you know, I'd say, yeah, the examples would be like, you know, going for my hour walk at 1:30, and then blocking that out of my day to say, okay, I can't do any Zooms that day, or, you know, just I guess, yeah, the repetitive ritual, daily or weekly or whatever you do, whatever that looks like for you. And I suppose that also sustains a longer period of time for me, because I'm thinking of it as like daily maintenance, or I'm thinking of it as like something that I actively have to do to uphold and be accountable to myself for, I guess, be accountable to my own care and doing that for myself. So I suppose, you know, putting that in a Fringe context, I guess it's like, you know, what are the things that you do daily, weekly, you know, as like a kind of pattern to sustain a longer period of time, so that self-care isn't a thing that's done maybe at the start and then gets forgotten about for 3 weeks and then comes back again. And there's these gaps that, you know, have maybe had an impact, but you don't realize it at the time, and it maybe has a prolonged what's the word, like a later effect on mental well-being or mental health, to whoever that is at the Fringe or in that context.
I love that. And I guess that fits, Lauren, with that idea you were saying about putting things in a budget, structuring things, planning self-care into what you're doing. Have you got any examples of how other people that you've worked with have done that, or how you've done that yourself?
Yeah, I think that, so sort of two things. A small thing is, from the experience of a producer, is assessing whether you actually need to be on site, on the road, at the Fringe the whole month. Like, is it necessary for you to do it? Because I think for me, one of the things that sort of fueled my, I'm going to smash through the month the first time I do this, is that there's a perception that the Fringe is hard, it's hard going, it's hard work, and you play hard, and you have to suck it up because that's what everyone has to do. It's expected, and you have to enjoy it, and you have to make the most of every possibility, and be in the bars afterwards, and be there with a drink in your hand. But I've identified that I actually don't need to be on site all the time. I can work remotely. We can all work remotely now. Like, being together in a room is really precious and nourishing, but actually I can fulfill my duties from my living room. And I can't sleep, and I need to be able to sleep when I'm working that hard. So I need to be at home with my slippers and my cat and my partner. So that's something. It's like, it's managing everybody else's expectations about my time as a producer. And that's something that I try to help others that I'm working with who are supporting and managing a show is, do you need to be there the whole time? Yeah. And it's actually come up in the comments here, but there is a structural thing that staff have been talking to venue partners and allies in Edinburgh, which is about alcohol and about sober spaces. And actually, at the start of last year, so Fringe 2020 planning, we were working with a venue partner who was going to present an artist that we work with. And a big part of the artist practice is thinking about recovery. And it would have been a safer space for that artist if perhaps drink wasn't available on the night that they were performing. So the venue was really close to committing to having a sober weekend in their program in Fringe, actually. And it was a big conversation, because that's obviously going to take a big financial hit doing that. But it was so interesting, because then we got to thinking that a lot of networking events revolve around alcohol, formal and informal. And we don't need to do that. Like, we actually don't. It's not necessary. Like, we don't need Bucks Fizz at a morning meeting. We just don't need it. So I think there's sort of the small action of me really being realistic about my time with others, but also using that to have like really proactive, big conversations about, let's help each other be healthier by perhaps not serving alcohol 24/7 at Fringe. It's a really important point that came up by Sean in the chat, and it's something that we're thinking about as well.
I agree completely. And I think it's that, again, that Edinburgh experience that you get invited into. And it's funny how we're talking very practically about things that are often, like things that we can manage to do even on a low budget and may even help us. So the finance of going out and drinking every night is another factor. But sleep, diet, and exercise is kind of things that hold us together, thinking about the effects of alcohol, all those kind of things. And maybe thinking of, it's easier maybe to think about them beforehand than when you get there and you think, well, I've got to do this. And that kind of sense of what you have to do. I mean, Diana, we met at 2019's festival when you were performing your show. How did you find it? And what were the practical ways you looked after yourself?
Well, yeah, just quickly on that subject of alcohol too, performing in the morning or the afternoon and having the audience themselves, it's really nice for them to be able to bring alcohol into the theater. As an artist, it's somewhat shocking though, if it's early. And so as an artist, when I'm performing a highly intense show, I worried about my audience when I saw that they were drinking and then having to step into my intense story, because I never know how people are going to react with it. And that said, again, with the whole conversation on space, there was not space then to take care of my audience in the way I like to. When I perform at a run or here in America, I build into my performance a talk back discussion so that we can have space to breathe and talk and just give them a buffer between stepping into that very personal, intense story and the outside world. And so part of my self-care is also ensuring that I can't guarantee how people are going to take it or what's going to happen, but putting those buffers in place really helps actually me as the artist too, because I'm I'm able to interact with my audience and really hear the impact of why I'm doing it, but I'm also able to ensure that I can nurture them a little bit before reentry. So again, that really gave me a lot of anxiety, to be honest, in Fringe. And because I'm a solo performer, I also wasn't able to have the community that those talkback discussions usually give me. So my reflection were reviews that weren't always kind. So I really had to find new ways of self-care. And my apartment that I had rented, and that was going to be my buffer, that actually didn't feel safe. So I think for me, it was a lot of pivoting and a lot of saying, okay, this isn't working. What's a solution? One solution I thought of is, I'm an improviser. I need time to play. That refreshes me and that rejuvenates me. So I sought out improvisers. I didn't always find my community, but if there was maybe a way for us to like find the communities easier in the masses, that's helpful. My self-care really became, to be 100% honest, and I know this might sound cliche, but I found it in my performance, because I had anticipated my safe space to be my home. And so that, like Vijay was saying, that ritual of stepping onto the stage every day at 2:45, even though I'm talking about personal trauma, it's a comedy, but even though I was talking about personal trauma, that became my incubator. And I just I let that be my displacement between the two worlds of reality, if that makes sense.
That really does. And I think that kind of sense of, we're getting into those things that help us flourish, but also those things that ground us. And Lauren shared a brilliant idea that she uses of a worry stone. I find grabbing and rubbing something that has personal connection, comes from the earth, grounds me throughout the day. And I use a stress ball. I never used to think it was particularly effective. And then I started using it during some therapy and found it incredibly helpful to put my worries and anxieties into that movement. If anybody else has got any kind of things that they use to help ground themselves, put them on the chat, or even if you want to put up your hand and share, please feel free. Touching the earth with bare feet, water, cold showers, that's a great one. Particular TV programs, Joe says, who watches on repeat. Again, these are kind of things that are really helpful. You might need a little bit of planning and structuring, but give us kind of real help. While everybody's chipping in, has anybody else on the panel got any grounding techniques they use?
I can say one more thing. My show does make voices out of characters of our mind. So and it's a comedy, but some of the, there's a lot of anxiety, or there's fear, or different feelings we have. We also have joy. We have different feelings. Of course, we all know we're human. One of the things that I do to really ground myself is to listen to those feelings and to accept them and to honor them. And even when I'm at Fringe or in my daily life, sometimes I play them. I have little characters, and that helps me break from the cycle of feeling the intense emotions and being able to step outside of them.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And it's funny, isn't it? I was reflecting with somebody this morning before this kind of meeting about that kind of positive psychology stuff. When you are struggling with emotions, and people often tell you, you've got to be upbeat, you've got to enjoy the moment. And actually, it's hard when you're struggling. So being able to be in the moment, even when I feel sad, I'm going to actually allow that emotion to take place, is really important. We've got a couple of others: walking on wet grass, getting exposure to sunlight. I'm like Joe, watching my favorite TV programs on repeat. It's knowing of what will happen just calms me. I think these are great ideas, and we'll all have a toolkit that we'll put together. And again, maybe this comes back to some of the points that already been made about a little bit of planning and allowing yourself permission to have space to do these things. I really liked coming back to Vijay's ideas. This is self-maintenance that we're making space for. We're kind of coming into land a little bit, and I wanted the last few minutes to do a little mindful exercise so that we can just take what we want to out of this session. But I wonder if I give Diana and Vijay and Lauren one more challenge. So you're now in charge of the Fringe for next year. How would you make the Fringe a mentally well event, what would you do? What's one thing you would do to make it a mentally well event? I've thrown that at you. So whoever's ready, go first.
I think I'm going to jump in with some structural stuff. So I think all of the organisers and everybody getting together, having these kind of conferences to really work out what the structures for care and wellbeing are going to be, and writing one that is going to be, I guess, universal to an extent, but one that can be flexible and interchangeable depending on the artist that they're working with. So I think it would be sitting down with all sort of venue managers and anyone in sort of positions of organizational and structure to deliver a structure that centers, and not only centers, but puts at the forefront access and care considerations for all creators that will attend the Fringe, not knowing what their requirements are going to be, not knowing what their access is going to be, building that structure from the groundwork. So I think in terms of all planning and delivery, that would need to be kind of agreed and organised at the, from now, I guess, for the next Fringe. It would need to be a sort of long, sort of built-in time structure as well to do it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Diana, Lauren?
Well, I learn a lot from Vijay, you putting forth the access writer and the structural changes. Like, I definitely think that employing what we learn from each other is really important. And that said, I would, yes, second, definitely that. And having a peer network, having a mentor that's been there, that's been on the ground, not necessarily, maybe it's a group of people. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but that's not necessarily that the expectation is that I'm going to go out and make sure your show is a success. It's that I'm going to make sure that I can have coffee with you if you need to, if you're going through a rough time or something, because I think that it's so overwhelming going your first time. And even if you do put the structures you think you'll need in place, they'll have to pivot. And it's really hard to find that community or that person that's going to be your advocate, even with all of the stuff that the Fringe Society does is really spectacular. But I think having a pure network of people who've been there, who understand, and who you can come to unapologetically, not necessarily, for mental health total support, because sometimes there are challenges that are a little more complex that require trained professionals, but just a place to go.
Mm. And Lauren's agreed with you, saying someone to talk to is huge. And I think that's fantastic. So there's two sides of things. There's the structural thing and then peer networks and support. Lauren, have you got a big idea for next year's Fringe?
Yeah, of course. I'm a producer. That's what I do. So sober spaces, sober moments in the festival, an actual quiet room, a quiet space that has someone that has like mental health first aid available, like just a standard. And care and access is implemented at the very beginning of a discussion or a negotiation around a Fringe presentation or a performance. So it's not an afterthought. Audiences' access and needs, the presenting artist companies' access needs are not an afterthought. Everything is discussed at the very beginning. And it's a point of contract. So once you've signed it, you're committed to it. And then the last thing, I would personally issue everybody, absolutely everybody, audiences, artists, workers, the most incredible magnesium lavender bedtime lotion. It helps you go to sleep. It knocks you out. It's amazing. And magnesium bath salts. Everyone would get one from me. Everyone here would have one. That's what I would do.
Fantastic. I think I would put you three in charge. That sounds amazing. And I think it's lovely to kind of like frame those things in some kind of practicalities. And again, what I've loved about all that you've shared this afternoon is it's all intensely practical. There's things that we can do, things that we can get involved in. Let me just recap a little bit. We've talked around planning and about thinking about shaping what you're doing before it happens. What support are you going to get? What kind of networks? That wonderful kind of like lesson from Vijay about having structures that make you safe first and putting yourself first. We've talked a lot around the practicalities of care lines in budgets, finding space and time. We talked about Access Rider, and Vijay's kindly mentioned that in the chat to have a look at that if you want to. We've talked about sober spaces. There was a lovely comment just in the chat about actually artists' meetings and networks don't have to have alcohol at all. Maybe it's harder for punters and attenders, but actually artist meeting, there's no reason why you couldn't do that now. We've talked about those kind of repetitive elements of self-maintenance, and then we've come up with some kind of bigger ideas around organizational, getting the venue managers to talk together, about having peer networks, and then having things like quiet spaces, care and access at the beginning of conversations. And what we'd like to do out of the back of this conversation is really begin to build on some of these ideas. Now, I know, Lauren, there's a place where people can go on the something to aim for website. Is that all right after the event?
Yeah, so we will we proactively use our Twitter through the Sick of the Fringe and staffs to sort of keep connected conversations going. And through our work with the Edinburgh Fringe Society, we will roll out and hold space for us all to stay connected between now and the next Fringe. So keep in touch with us on our social media channels, and yes, our website is there for you to sort of outline where you can contact us as well.
Could you stick them in the chat so that
absolutely
people, that would be amazing. And then Diana and Vijay, are there websites? If there are websites so people can follow up what you do, and I think Vijay, you've already put yours in, but if not, do you want to just mention them again? But is there anything else, ways that people can keep connected with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I'm at Diana Varco, so I'm not that hard to find. So yeah.
Fantastic.
Right. I've just put my socials in the chat as well, just as another way of keeping up to date with what I'm doing. But also just to explain what I put in the chat earlier about the Access Rider. So I've got my Access Rider is now public, available to view or download on my website. So feel free to have a look there. I can put my website link again in the chat so that you can find it, but it's at Vijay Patel Theatre. www.vijaypateltheatre.co.uk, and you'll find a section there on Access Riders.
And are you okay if people take that as an inspiration if they need to do that themselves?
That's fine, yeah. And there's also, I think if you Google Access Rider templates, there's also loads out there. I think there's one on Unlimited that you can have a look at as well. I hope I've said that right. Joe's just put,
oh yeah, well done, Joe.
Put it in the chat. Yeah, I knew there was one on Unlimited.
Thanks so much, Joe.
There are loads of available templates, and it's growing in terms of how we make Access Riders. And to say that is another thing, if I was in charge of the Fringe, that's another thing that I would look to implement, is how we circulate and make with support Access Riders for everyone who needs them, basically.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And if I could just piggyback really quickly on that too, having a safeguarding statement. I've seen organizations do that for their events and shows. I do that in some ways with the program, but I think having a safeguarding statement for your audience might be really helpful to help people know how to take care of themselves after, especially if they're stepping into intense subjects.
Absolutely. Well, look, we want to kind of take some of these kind of like ideas and build on them. But for now, I wonder if we could just finish by just having a minute just to absorb whatever you want to absorb as you take away. Thanks so much to our panel for being so amazing. I've been deeply inspired by just listening to all that you've been sharing, all of your ideas. And then also thank you to all of you for contributing as well through the chat. And so why don't we just take a moment just to be still. And we're going to use our breathing and just to think about something you want to hold on to and something you want to let go. So whatever way you want, you could turn the screen off if you want to. And just focus on your breathing just for a moment. And on that inward breath, it's funny how we very rarely actually think about breathing. So just do this in a nice and relaxed way. But when you're ready, just on an inward breath, think about something you want to hold on to. What's one thing that you want to take away from this session that you might go and implement, or something you might go and think about? And then on an outward breath, what's one thing you want to let go? Maybe a pressure to be an artist more than a human being, or to not put in self-care. Maybe you want to let that go, that pressure, and actually allow yourself, give yourself permission to focus on yourself. So one thing that you want to keep on an inward breath, and then when you go out, one thing you want to let go, and just focus on the rise and fall of your chest just for a minute. And on each in, think about what you want to hold on to, and on each outward breath, what you want to let go. And I'll just leave that just for 30 seconds before we finish. So something you want to hold on to, something you want to let go. Lauren, Diana, Vijay, thank you so much for being such brilliant contributors today. I really appreciate it. Katie, I don't know if there's anything more you need to say, but other than that, it's 2:30 now, and it's the end of the session. But thanks so much, everybody, for taking part.
No, I was just jumping in, Andy, to say thanks as well to everybody. I know that Rachel from our senior management team at the Fringe Society has been tuning in throughout. And Rachel, actually, you're there still. Good. If you've anything to jump in with, Rachel, because I know that this is a really important conversation for us to bring forward.
Really, just what I've just put in the chat. Thank you. That was a really beautifully generous session. It's heard. It's an ongoing conversation. We're working with staff. We've got a strategic partnership with them to look at exactly these conversations, and it's a work in progress. So keep talking to us, as Lauren said, and we'll keep working together. But it's right at the forefront of our agenda at the Fringe Society. So this is a generous session, and it's hugely appreciated that you all gave your time and so much of yourselves to helping us to make the Fringe as good a place to perform as it can be. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but we'll keep working on it together. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Rachel. That's wonderful.
And a huge thank you as always to Max and David, our BSL interpreters, for today's session. You've done amazingly well to keep up with everyone and this entire conversation. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and we hope to see you at another Fringe Connect session before the end of the week. Bye.
Bye.